Chapter 4. Once I began second grade at Hudson School, it became more and more obvious that I wouldn't survive there. My class was considerably larger, about 20 or 25 children. There was more information to learn, information that simply went over my head. I remember taking spelling tests where the teacher would walk around the room reciting the words we needed to write down, and I routinely handed in a blank piece of paper. I felt terribly inadequate when I did so. There was no way at this age that I could reason that it was not my fault. Based on actions and hearing family members, teachers, and students, I perceived that I was some kind of defective freak. Deafness was bad. I was bad. I needed to be fixed. Being fixed was no walk in the park. My family kept sending me to doctors and audiologists, all the while reinforcing my mistaken belief that I was a freak of nature. My ears were tested so often that I learned by roll the entire word sheet the audiologist would read at varying frequencies. Say the word hot dog. Say the word toothbrush. This was worse than Chinese water torture. Say the word nauseated. Despite the way I felt in the audiologist booth, however, it was not my intention to attack the audiology profession. Audiologists are crucial for the purpose of assessment and placement. There is, however, a reasonable limit to how many times you can be tested and retested. My limit was exceeded to the point where even the ENT specialist told my grandfather to get a grip and to start accepting my hearing loss. Furthermore, it didn't do any good at all to be placed in an environment where I would repeatedly fail. There is no actual pass or fail as far as an audiological test are concerned. It's just an assessment, not a quiz. But no one took the time to explain that to me. They should have. Today, an increasing number of audiologists know sign language. They're able to explain to deaf children that hearing tests are merely evaluations which will help other people understand how to accommodate their needs. In my opinion, this ability to communicate with their clients should be an absolute must. I say this because I felt like an insufficient guinea pig when I was tested. I was totally terrorized. I felt like I was failing miserably, and I also felt like I was letting my family down. Most of the time, I didn't mind the raise your hand at the beep routine because it was relatively simple. If I heard a beep, I would raise my hand. If I didn't hear a beep, I didn't know I'd missed anything. But when it came to the part where I had to repeat words and sentences the audiologist said without being permitted to read her lips, that's when I felt like an incompetent fool. Incompetent fool or not, I was fitted with 2 hearing aids, which did nothing but make my life even more miserable. Hearing adults suddenly expected me to hear everything that was said, further intimidating me into believing I had to be like them. I began nodding, saying yes to everything people said without having the slightest clue as to what they were talking about. That's right. I was a walking bobblehead doll. Yes, other people's voices were certainly louder when I wore the hearing aids, but my ability to understand their speech showed no significant improvement. The only advantage of having hearing aids for me was that I could actually hear the toilet flush from the next room. This must have been culturally significant because it was around that time that the first toilet was flushed on the national television when Archie Buckner did the honors on All in the Family. I'm eternally grateful to my family and medical professionals for making it possible for me to share that special moment. In school, though, there was nothing special about wearing hearing aids. I was made fun of and ridiculed. Second grade was the only time in my life where I routinely got into fights and received report cards that said my behavior left much to be desired. It was obvious that there was no way I could keep this up. At this juncture, my grandparents went out and did the best favor they ever could have done for me at the time. They did their homework, checked out a number of possibilities, and enrolled me to Plymouth Meeting Friends School, a small private school outside of Philadelphia. PMFS offered a cozy learning environment that would be a welcome change for the crowded classrooms at Hudson School. Also, I didn't know while I was there, but PMFS's Quaker background and philosophy would later have a tremendous impact on my personal growth. Upon entering the third grade at PMFS, I was, of course, apprehensive. I assumed I would be the laughing stock of the class and initially kept my guard up at all times. Fortunately, my assumption was wrong. With PMFS, small student populations, there were only about 8 kids in each class. Not only that, but each class also had a teacher's aide, meaning the student-teacher ratio was a comfortable 4-to-1. It was very clear from the start that I would get some much-needed individual attention. It helped immensely. Anytime I misunderstood instructions, and that was quite often, the teacher's aide would zoom to the rescue, fill me in with the details, and I would be right up with the rest of the class in schoolwork. While it was clear from the start that I would be in good hands academically, I was still concerned about my social life. Memories of the taunts and fights I had put up with at Hudson School were still fresh in my mind. However, my third grade teacher, Mrs. Paul, had gone out of her way to make me feel welcome at PMFS. She had previously explained to her class that there would be a hard of hearing boy joining them, and she encouraged them to ask questions so that they knew what to expect. She encouraged them to speak clearly so that I could read their lips and feel like I was a part of the class. I was certainly grateful when I noticed that I was accepted warmly. There was some curiosity about what I was like and how my hearing aids worked, but no one made fun of me. Miss Paul did an excellent job of helping us all go through the transition. Old habits die hard, though, so I was still on my guard for a while before I completely settled down at PMFS. I figured it was only a matter of time before some Mormon would poke fun at me and I'd have to defend myself. Most of the kids quickly got along with me, but I was just waiting for that one idiot who always had to screw everything up. And there was indeed one particular boy, Quinn, who seemed to be making fun of me. Actually, he was making fun of everyone and everything. He was one of those fun-loving types who was always laughing and cracking jokes. Nonetheless, I eyed him suspiciously and didn't like him. Anytime he laughed, I figured that it had to be something about me. Finally, on one cold winter day, we were all outside playing snow football. We were having a blast tackling each other in the snow and sliding all over the place. Suddenly, when I had the ball, Quinn delivered a good hit and knocked the wind out of me. Normally, I would have been a good sport, but this particular hit knocked the hearing aid right off my ear. It was a quick and sudden reminder to everyone that I was different. To make matters worse, the battery had come loose and fallen out. It was lost somewhere in a vast field hidden under 6 inches of snow. I made a fuss over the battery, but actually it was just my pride that was hurt. When we returned to class, Miss Paul heard about what had happened from one of the students. She approached me and asked me about the battery. A number of students were standing around her, showing as much concern as my teacher. "Do you have another battery at home?" asked Miss Paul. "Nope," I said, feeling sorry for myself. Quinn, the guy I knew would make fun of me, walked up. "How much does it cost for a new one?" "About $100, I whined. $100 my ass. You can replace a hearing aid battery as quickly and as cheaply as a regular wristwatch battery. But I was the class freak, or so I thought, so I figured if the equipment I had was incredibly expensive, then it must be incredibly important. Right after I gave this incredibly exaggerated value of the hearing aid battery, some of the students volunteered to go out and look for it. And look for it they did. On a football field covered with 6 inches of snow. Given that a hearing aid battery is less than half the size of a marble, this would be much harder than looking for a proverbial needle in a haystack. It should have been touching enough that they were so considerate that they tried looking for it, but they went way beyond that. They searched high and low and found it. They actually found the damn thing. It was none other than Quinn, who rushed in, smiling proudly, and handed me the $100 battery. The lesson I learned in friendship that day was worth $1,000,000. After the hearing aid incident, I became more comfortable with PMFS and had no problem getting along with others. I related quite well with the classmates who were as accommodating as the staff. My best friend Norman, who called me up on the phone during evenings and weekends, patiently repeated words or even spelling them until I understood what he was saying. In class, other students often took the burden off of the teacher's aide by repeating instructions or assignments that I didn't understand. With this kind of support, I no longer felt ashamed or embarrassed by my deafness. I began to feel I fit in so well that I was practically as hearing as everyone else. When it was suggested that I take up speech therapy, I gladly consented because I viewed it as something that would make me even more hearing. It would, my grandparents assured me, help me speak the same way as everyone else. So I figured, why not? I was so encouraged by the way I was fitting in PMFS that I perceived speech therapy as icing on the cake. I was finally going to look, act, and speak like a hearing person. My speech teacher, Miss Wells, was a funny, highly creative person who knew how to turn a dreary activity into something a whole lot more fun. She did not exhibit the "we need to fix you" sense of urgency that I had perceived from other professionals. If I pronounced a word wrong, she would make a funny face, get me laughing, and encourage me to get it right. When I did get a tough word right, I would gleefully repeat it until she screamed, "Arrgh, no more, I'm sick of that word." The more success I had, the more she let me drive her up the wall. I would come home and brag to my family that I was so good at what I did that I was driving my speech teacher nuts. I was on the road to hearing person and very proud of it. After about 2 years of speech therapy, however, I had a rather humbling wake-up call. My mother had introduced me to a hearing acquaintance of hers, with whom I proudly held a brief conversation. Although my mother's friend knew sign language, I kept my hands to myself and used my speech. I managed to go through the customary "how are you" and "nice to meet you," all without having to ask this woman to repeat anything she said. On top of that, I didn't even stutter once, smoothly going through those damned R's that used to give me a hard time. I was very proud of myself and beamed accordingly. My pride, however, soon took a nosedive. As my mother friend walked over to the car, I caught her signed conversation with my mom. "Is your son hard of hearing?" "Yes," my mom responded. "His hearing is slowly going down, just like his father and Uncle Bob. It's hereditary." "Yes, I could tell by his voice." My heart sank. I would continue to do my best to be as hearing as possible for the next several years, but this was a real smack in the face. Reality was a bummer. People would continue pushing for me to be as hearing as possible, and I would still do my best to comply. Deep down, however, I knew I would always be different. Fortunately, if there was ever a good place to be different and still be accepted anyway, PMFS was it. As for all of the issues relating to the deafness, which I am bringing up in my book, there is nothing further to say regarding my years at PMFS. I was part of one big family, and I loved every minute of it. I don't recall sticking out like a sore thumb. In fact, grades 3 through 6 were the wonder years for me. It must have been the calm before the storm. We'll get to that storm later. That adolescent hell, also known as high school.